Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Bo Talifer and Eric Rasmussen. Season 2, Episode 2, Harmonic Patterns.
So Eric, we were having a private conversation before about whatever you want to call it, chord progressions, harmonic patterns, root melody patterns. I mean, that last one's pretty bad. What do you think about this? Because, you know, we teach tonal patterns, but it's kind of assumed that once a student can audiate certain functions and they know certain tonal patterns, miraculously somehow, if we have a certain chord progression that they want to improvise over, they're just going to spontaneously know how to link a 1 chord to a 5 chord, or a 1 chord to a 4 chord, or a 2 to a 5 to a 1. And that's not the case. That is a separate skill you have to learn to do. And so, I mean, in terms of improv, it makes sense, but it also, in terms of just being able to identify chord progressions, some chord progressions are so common, especially in jazz and classical music, 4-5-1, 2-5-1, and I mean, I'm thinking a lot of jazz here, but it has nothing to do with any specific genre. So, I mean, that's kind of a good starting point just as a grab bag of ideas that we might want to riff on. But what comes to mind, you know, when you hear those sorts of ideas?
So what I have intentionally thought about for many years, and I had to hone my vocabulary when I wrote my book. And because as I was writing, what do I really mean and how specific do I want to be? Well, I want to be as specific as possible with regard to the terms that you use or that most people use. And chord progressions is in the vernacular, right? And 2-5-1 is like the theory of those things that we're talking about, because everybody here knows the theory. But when I'm bringing up children and trying to teach people to use my harmonic learning sequence, I wanted to be especially specific about what we're actually talking about. So there's a melody, and then it's the root melody. So to me, it's not a bass line, because a bass line has several tones in it that may or may not be part of the chord, right? So
sure, yeah.
You know, the passing tones and all that kind of stuff. But I'm talking about just the root, you know, for Mary Had a Little Lamb, dum 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 dum, right? Or whatever, the melody that fits with the chord change, when the chord changes. So it's the next easiest thing to teach along with the melody, right? That you just sing a melody and you sing the roots that go with that melody. Only the root of the particular harmonic function. So people say chord sometimes, but I want to be specific about what I'm talking about. Harmonic function is different than a chord to me. Every chord has a harmonic function as long as there's some kind of context around. So, but a harmonic
that's where you get into these terminology issues, because there's no doubt when you talk to some jazz musicians that know their stuff and they're like, yeah, this is the chord progression.
Yeah.
I mean, they're using that term, but they're really talking about what you're talking about.
Yeah, a chord could be G, right?
Sure.
Or G7, say. But a harmonic function, how does that G chord fit inside the function? And I'm more concerned about that than the chord itself. So the chord could be something without context, like the letter A or the note A, right? That doesn't have any meaning until obviously there's some kind of syntax and context for that note. You know, what is it? Is it, you know, hey, it's the 9th of a scale if you're in G, but is it, you know, is it the root of the supertonic function, or is it the 9th of a major G7?
Well, you get into this once you start putting, because you're talking about root melodies, but I mean, a function can still be a function even if the root is not in the bass. So, I mean, that's what the study of counterpoint is knowing what can be in the bass, and so you can do it the other way around too. You can start to,
Yeah.
and people have problems with this. Like if you're in the key of C and you play a C sharp in the bass, I mean, what goes on in your mind? What chords go with that, or what functions go with that?
Oh,
Start thinking A7 or
yeah,
D flat.
you could think anything.
Dominant seven.
And what
Yeah, so,
matters
like-
is you got your oral first, and then you sing the roots on bum or do or anything really. I sing them with words sometimes. Mary had a little lamb. No, she didn't. Yes, she did. Mary, no, yes, and they think that's funny. So that's a neat way to teach the root melodies. So there's a lot of variety, but let's keep honing this vocabulary and go all the way through what I've thought of. So that progression fits with Mary Had a Little Lamb. That harmonic progression that I sang a minute ago. What is that composed of, that root melody? Well, it just has a bum and bum. So that is the root set for that song. You only need a tonic and a dominant root.
And they're in a very specific
and that is
rhythmic pattern too within that.
A root set does not. It's just those are the two tones you need to sing to understand Mary Had a Little Lamb and the root melody. So I'm taking it out of rhythmic context at that point.
For sure.
Root melody is in harmonic context, tonal context, obviously, and it's also it's also in the context of the song because it moves with the rhythm. So Mary had a little lamb, bum 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 bum. So you've got that root melody tied exactly to the melody. Okay, and then the root set. What are the roots that are encountered during Mary Had a Little Lamb? Well, it's just bum and bum, and if they're ready, do and so, and if they're ready, do mi so fa re ti do. Those are the tonal patterns that fit with the harmonic understanding of that. Of the roots and of the functions, right? So the root set are just, it's like the set. It's like if you've got nine kinds of birds, and there's 20 of one kind, 20 robins, 15 cardinals, 2 ducks, whatever. That your set is just cardinal, robin, duck.
Yeah, and your book is sequenced in a way where the sets are manageable, which is what I consider to be like one of the major successes of your book, is that the functions are introduced in a digestible, logical way.
Yeah. So the root set, if you want to consider the 3 most important tones that a child sings, all you really got to teach, and this is before they can sing other tonal patterns, you can just have them sing these 3 tones, do, fa, so, do, and I add, and re. So there's four roots that compose that root set, and you've covered tonic, dominant, subdominant, and double dominant. And of course, you sung the root melodies, which are in the context of the rhythm of the melody that they go to, but the root set is just the 3 or 4 roots of the chords, or the harmonic functions.
The set is not concerned with the rhythmic order or the rhythmic length or the specific order. You're just talking about the functions that someone can tonally identify.
Just 4 tones that the kids need to sing to understand the roots. Begin to understand the roots. So they can be out of context rhythmically, but they're generally not out of context in terms of doing some weird, 5, 1, 4, it's just, that doesn't make sense. I don't know if I sang that right, but so they're still harmonically uh, in some order. Like always start on
Sure.
on tonic, go to something back to tonic, or you could do tonic, subdominant, dominant, tonic. But now you're having the children recognize familiar harmonic patterns, and a harmonic pattern is like bum 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 bum, but with I'm playing the functions along with the roots, so they're listening to 1 4 5 1 or 1 4 double dominant. How do I do that? Yeah, 1 4 double dominant dominant, or tonic subdominant double dominant dominant. That's a harmonic pattern because they're hearing the full progression, and I call them harmonic patterns. You could call them harmonic progressions, but I'm teaching them like we teach patterns. Like, boys and girls, listen, we've done this song, we've done that song, we know yes, no, uh-oh. And I'll play yes, uh-oh, no, yes. Or I go yes, uh-oh, yes, no, yes. Those are harmonic patterns that are now outside the context of maybe even of the song itself, other than it's in the same tonality. A harmonic pattern is, can you recognize, the functions? I'm going to play bum, 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 and you tell me yes, oh, no, yes, bum, 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 and I want the kids to be able to tell me, what did I play? And they use yes, no, uh-oh, or tonic, dominant, subdominant, whatever vocabulary they're ready for. If they're using sophisticated vocabulary, then they recognize those. Root patterns. Okay, they recognize the root patterns and how they fit with the harmonic patterns. And you could call it a progression if you wanted to, but I'm teaching, like, here's a pattern that you recognize, or maybe I should just call it progression. A progression that you recognize already.
Well, I'm not making a claim what we should call it. I'm just saying so people can identify in the wild. It's going to be called a progression normally. Yeah. You'll encounter that. Yeah. Depending on the genre you're in. Yeah. But a progression can sound like an 8-bar, 20 chord thing, right? When you're just talking about something that's a little more micro.
Yeah, I am. That's exactly what it is. So a progression.
So I think that distinction is worth making.
Yeah, there could be a longer phrase. Well, that's no longer a pattern. A pattern's a piece of a progression. That could be called a progression, but it is smaller. A progression.
Just like we don't have a 20 note. We don't have a 20 tone. One chord tonal pattern.
No,
it's just silly at that point.
Yeah, the patterns, when we're teaching tonal patterns, are comprised of no more than 5 tones. Usually 2 or 3, sometimes 4, but definitely no more than 5.
Which makes total sense in terms of people's working memory.
Yeah, that's how you're going to learn a tonal pattern. Is you can't do do mi so do so mi so do.
I think you could, but the value of doing that is not worth the time put in. It's just silly.
It's silly. Yeah, by that time. Just learn songs.
And it's not as generalizable because these smaller units are more easily seen in other larger contexts of a whole song or the start of another melody, right? Yeah,
if you're going to learn that, go ahead and learn dum 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 dum. Right? If you're going to learn harmonic, tonal patterns in rhythm, you just learn a song. So there's nothing. This is a sidebar for a second. Nothing wrong.
Actually, that sidebar is very interesting to go down because it explains why someone like me, who that's how I learned air quote tonal patterns. And then what I would do is I would generalize. I would say, hey, that song sounds like the first 2 notes or first 3 notes of this Mozart song that I have in my mind. So I was doing the generalization, but using just songs as the patterns.
Yeah. So you start with a song, and then how do you learn more about that song in terms of its harmony? You teach the root melody. Now that you've got the root melody, well, let's distill that down to the 3 or 4 roots, or could be 5 or 7, right? You could distill that down to the root sets that you want. And I teach those root sets through harmonic patterns. Or the root sets are just the most distilled roots. You distill down the roots for this one progression or the whole song. If it's a 1-4-5 song, or a song that's just 1-5-1, I mean, you only need 3 notes there. If it's 4 in the root set, now, you know, the A section happens, then the A section happens again, then the B section, and then the A section happens again. Well, the root set doesn't expand. Your root melody certainly expands, right?
Yeah, there's no new functions and no new roots that go with those functions.
And now I'm just going to take the ending of the song, and the ending of the song might be just 1-5-1. You know, do, so, do. And the thing about these root sets, which to me is so cool, is all you do is change. You're not changing one tone, but you're changing the context. So it's still a perfect fourth and a fifth above the root, 1-4-5-1. Well, now just change it to minor, and you still got bum 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 bum. But now that's la mi la re mi la, and all of a sudden that same do fa so do, it rhymes with the major, and you're not changing anything but the context. So they're already singing the same pattern, and I'm talking about root pattern, but changing the context. So it's super duper easy, and you're only ever working with 3 or 4 tones at a time initially with 3, 4, 5-year-olds. It's just those 3 tones, and it could be G. You go down to the 4th, 5th. If you're in the key of G, major or minor, you go down, so you can stay in the audiation range.
And you can do this really well with other tonalities like Dorian and
absolutely
super. And what was I doing? I was telling you about comparing Lydian to Lydian Sharp 2, which is absolutely beautiful. The difference between the two is so audible, just that when you compare them. Because they have a similar movement. There's something, like you said, rhymes, there's some kind of similarity.
Yeah. So with my kids, if they learn the root patterns, all they need is the essential functions of any tonality that they already have in their, listening and performing vocabulary.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and, so there's 3 notes in that root set. Now there's a lowered 7th, if you want to call it that, or, so, fa, so, do, so, fa, so, or, and it's that root set it's exactly the same for Dorian, except now it's, re, do, re, right? So, re, do, re. That's so, fa, so, do, so, fa, so. Right? Now it's switched to Dorian. Re, do, re. So, re, do, re. So there's another rhyming root set. You're not really learning a root pattern, does it?
And once you get to symbolic note association, whether it's on an instrument, like the visuals of a keyboard or the staff of the notation, I mean, this is so ridiculously easy for people to see the similarities.
Yeah. When I do symbolic association now, I'm not doing note reading. I'm doing chord symbols. Function symbols. So chord symbol would be, C7 over F and F or whatever.
Sure.
What I'm talking about is, the Roman numerals that we use for functions. And the kids understand, why it's a little I and a capital I. Lowercase I and a cap, what is that? Well, how we do 1, we've been doing the fingers for a little while, how we do 1, 4. I want to show you what they look like in another language. And then I show them the Roman numerals. And I said, why we use these? So you can make big ones and little ones. And you guys know major, minor so easily. Well, this is a major sounding, tonic, and this is a minor sounding tonic. And they start to realize, hey, well, Dorian has a minor sounding tonic, and they don't know what it is until you put the functions around it. And in fact, I have a first grader in a recording, I played D minor chord on the piano. I said, "What is that?" And they say, "I don't know." I said, "Well, could that be tonic and major?" And they say, "No, no." I said, "Well, what is it?" And they said, "Well, it could be Dorian," the guy says. And I said, "Yeah, it could be." And they said, "Or minor?" I said, "Yeah, it could be." So I do this, if they know enough songs in the tonalities, and they've done root patterns and root sets, it becomes easy to understand the harmonic patterns, right? And then the chord progressions, if you want to call it in the vernacular, that go all the way, that can be a short one or a long one, right? But they've done the root melodies. The root sets are just a way for us to look at how many functions are there in this tune and break them into root patterns. Now listen to, bum, 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 and that's so, fa, so, or it could be, obviously I'm accompanying myself so that they're
Yeah.
you can hear,
I mean,
you can
that's
hear the
important
change.
because-
So I can't sing this is the thing about these things, you can't sing progressions.
Yep.
Because the progression doesn't have, our voice, you can't do two tones at once unless you're a Tuvan throat singer. Or,
Yeah. I mean,
those guys are so cool.
Yeah, but in terms of a reasonable argument for not using it makes no sense. I wanted to, so, if we play devil's advocate for a second here, and say, well, why do the patterns? Why not just teach the individual functions and tonal patterns, and why isn't that good enough? Why teach the patterns? Why are the patterns necessary to learn? Because I think that's something that people miss.
You're taking something that you just want to do what's easiest, and the song is, the first thing. Might not necessarily be easiest, but it's the first thing. And then you add the root melodies. And that's the next easiest thing. You sing these root melodies in the context of the song. They already know the song, so why make it harder by taking that out of the context of the song? So sing the root melodies in the context, the rhythm, and the style, right?
Sure.
Of the melody, because it makes it more fun. It's easier than anything else. And then you take those root melodies, and you could add the solfege to it if you wanted to, and that's just easy to do if they're ready for that.
One of the reasons I feel it's so important to actually learn the patterns, not just as sets that you're aware of, but actually learn specific patterns happening in specific orders, like 4-5-1, 2-5-1.
Yeah.
And here's a great example in the wild. Ask any jazz musician to solo over 2-5-1, guns blazing. Yeah. Ask them to solo over 5-2-1. Their playing quality will plummet. And the reason for that is their harmonic knowledge of 2-5-1 is treated as an individual unit. It's treated as an individual chunked pattern that they know the root melody of, they know lines that work over it, they know where the resolution is going, but most people don't have that same level of audiated familiarity with 5-2-1. And so you watch their soloing go down the drain. So I think a mistake that that could happen in a certain interpretation of MLT is to think, well, my students know tonal patterns, so what soloing is well, there's a 1 chord here, bum bum bum. Now 4's coming, bum bum bum. Now 5's coming, no 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 no. And that is not the way that a jazz musician or any reasonable improviser thinks. They don't think in harmonic chunks like that. Once you know a progression well enough and you know a tune well enough, you think of the whole progression as a single object that you pierce through. And I mean, I think that's just such an important thing to say because what that's a different context than like the beginning. But what Eric's doing by getting students to start with these sets in familiar patterns, like this is why I love the Mary Had a Little Lamb pattern, because it's a specific set of 1 and 5 in a very specific order that you learn to recognize everywhere. And that is the beginning for learning how to, improv is at the end of all this generalization. And that's how you get there. You have to breed familiarity with it. And so my only real point I'm making here is that just because you know the functions and you know tonal patterns doesn't mean your improv is going to sound even remotely coherent when you play over the song, because you have to get used to that context of the specific patterns in the specific orders, the specific harmonic patterns in this case. And I mean, even things like 2-5-1, if you think of 2-5-1 as an object, you can change the 5 chord to all kinds of crazy nonsense.
Oh, yeah.
You go 2, you can literally just play 2, smash the piano 1. And the progression is so powerful in terms of you have some audiated framework that you're predicting. People can tolerate it.
Well,
and that's why you get away with all these tritone subs and all this other nonsense.
Yeah. The most difficult thing I've had to teach ever is, frankly, form. Feel the form of the whole entire piece. And how you do that? Well, you chunk it into harmonic progressions. And you chunk harmonic progressions into, harmonic patterns, which are smaller and don't necessarily have to last a whole phrase. And then, and then chunk that down into what are the actual functions, the minimum amount of functions to make sense. And that could be in the context of the song or not. It doesn't have to be, you could do 1-4-1 or 1-5-1 when there's never.
And actually, it's even at that level when you're trying to teach form and awareness of like different harmonic length, different rhythmic lengths of the harmonic progression, and teaching someone to feel the form in their audio, and like just feel it in terms of they can tell the changes coming. The way you do that is you don't keep piling on more functions. You take a small set of functions they know, like 1-4-5. 1-4-5-2, and put them in these different orders.
Yeah, it's exactly.
And eventually the generalizing gets so strong that you don't have to keep memorizing them. But at first, it's just like learning tonal patterns. You have to learn like at least some, and that's why the blues is just so powerful for this.
Yeah. The blues, once you've got 1-4-5 and 5-5, the blues got to be in there real quick, because now all of a sudden you've got 5-4-1 at the end, which is unusual for the kids. Unless the
blues has all these different harmonic rhythms of these same functions, and depending on how you play the blues.
It could be country blues. It could be, Chicago blues. Could be New Orleans blues. It could be anything. Kansas City. All the different.
And like I was saying
traditions.
before, that this is what paves the way for making harmonic substitutions. You can start to treat functions as passing chords because they're not essential to the form of the song or the pattern. Like if you have 4-5-1, you could do 4, put something in between the 4-5-1, and as long as you audiate 4-5-1 well, adding a passing function is just like adding a chromatic tone in a single line melody.
You're taking what I'm doing and working it into a fairly advanced student for me that would, or a jazz student that needs those extra functions. For me, by 7
the
or
reason
8,
I highlight this, though, is that the stuff that you're doing with kids is not different than the stuff I would do with a 30-year-old that came for jazz piano lessons. If they can't identify 4-5-1 and sing the roots, like good luck, Sally. You're not soloing over this tune yet.
yeah, for sure.
Not at least in a harmonically specific way. There's all kinds of improv. You can just play whatever you want, and you can have Picasso improv. But I'm talking about being able to speak the changes harmonically, because that's the problem most people have, is they can't do that.
Yeah, and at some level, you don't need to know what they are. You just need to feel them. I mean, Errol Garner didn't need to know any theory, but 1,000 times 1,000%, he understood the progressions he was playing.
So maybe this is opening up a whole another topic of the importance of learning form and harmonic rhythm through induction, through inference. And I mean, I prefer induction just because I like that terminology better for this. But you need examples of different orders of the same functions before you can start to generalize. You have to have some kind of discrimination learning before you can get into inference learning. So, I mean, that shouldn't surprise anyone.
One of the things that I changed pretty substantially this year was, instead of playing a chord and tell me is that yes or no. And that worked for my aptitude test. But I would play something and it's yes, what's this? Uh-oh, what's this? No. And I think it's easier for the kids for me to go, yes, oh no, yes.
So
yes,
my
no,
experience
yes.
has been, yep.
And so that's been, rather than testing them, I'm teaching them. Because it's hard to just play a chord and say, that's yes. I mean, obviously, you establish tonality first. So, like just asking which one is which, that's one way to go about it. But I found it much easier and also discriminates better among the children. If I do 1-4-1 or 1-5-1, one of those is harder than the other, by the way, the first one. And then,
much
Ron Malanga agrees too. He says 1-4-1.
1-4-1 is harder than one tritone sub of 5-1. It's ridiculous. Like it actually is harder. It causes people confusion for whatever reason.
I think
my experience lines up with you in terms of, I think identifying the 5 chord is easier than the 1 chord, and then identifying 1-5-1 is easier than identifying the 5 chord.
That's why the first answer in my test is the 5. I want to make it as easy as possible. Is this yes or no? And no is definitely easier. Then immediately after no, you've got to go back to yes. And then the question is, will I do yes twice in a row or the other? Do they think it's a pattern? So you need to interrupt that pattern that they do. And it follows. I've stolen all of this from Gordon's method, but he never used it to teach harmonic functions, which is much easier than teaching tonal patterns. There's so much more information in 1-5-1 than there is do mi so fa re. There's just more information because 3 separate notes don't necessarily make. It could be a root one. Do mi so doesn't have to be tonic.
Doesn't have to be audiated as a 1 chord.
It doesn't have to be. It could be the roots to, and there are some geniuses out there. So, but I'm just saying it's easier, and then absolutely do the tonal patterns as soon as their kids are ready. But the kids are ready to do harmonic functions at 3, and almost no child is ready to do tonal patterns at 3 years old.
Yeah, and I totally agree. Just because we can't ask kids to sing harmonic functions does not mean that there's not a lot of very valid and essential learning going on for them to learn to identify them in their audiation.
Yeah.
Because I can audiate chords, I just can't sing them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, kids.
So
you just keep.
We end up in this. No, go ahead.
It just keeps. Why make it any harder than it needs to be for children? If they're ready to do something and are going to be successful at it, see, that's what encourages learning. Not giving them something hard and see when they can get it. It's getting something that's going to be achievable right away. And I
know, but we have this intense culture built around working too hard and pseudo discipline and too much grit and all this that it's silly. But one thing I've been doing with some new piano students, I have a couple new piano students this year. I teach them to play the chords before we start singing the tonal patterns, and they know the name of the chord by the hand signs. And then when we start doing the tonal patterns, they're just like, oh, this is just singing the 1 chord in a certain order. They immediately make the connection. But doing it the other way around, where they have a tonal pattern, and then you're like, what if we play all the tones from the tonal pattern at the same time? They don't learn it as well. Is it because you're teaching it in the wrong hierarchical order? And that's something that that's a hobby horse of mine.
Yeah.
From my allegiance to Engelmann.
Yeah.
Because some concepts are easier to learn when you learn them in higher order hierarchies. I mean, it's an annoying term if you're not familiar with theory of instruction, but I mean, there's, as an analogy, if you teach a kid what a vehicle is before teaching them specific examples of vehicles, they will learn the concepts better. So first you teach vehicle, you show them boats, trucks, ambulances, all this stuff. Then you go into, okay, kids, this is a truck. But if you try to do it the other way around and teach them trucks, then cars, and then boats, and say, hey, kids, these are all vehicles, they'll be like, so what?
Yeah.
So there's an order. Yeah. It's amazing how well this translates, even though Engelmann wasn't talking about teaching music. I mean, the guy was just disturbingly on point.
Yeah.
It breaks my heart we never had Engelman and Gordon in the same room,
Ugh.
to my knowledge.
Oh,
maybe
no,
one day they were just like at the same restaurant. And
You know,
didn't know.
neither is in the bibliography of the other.
Yeah, I think they were just like completely not aware of each other. But what's interesting is they both had this like very empirical behaviorist underpinning to everything they did.
Well,
And
everything came from the children. The children are always right.
I don't know if we ever told the story, but the way Engelman got into this is he had a philosophy degree, but he started working in an advertising firm, and they were like, how many times do kids have to watch a commercial to learn it?
Yeah.
And he was like, well, I should stop doing this and just figure out how kids actually learn, because it doesn't seem like anyone actually knows. Like when he went to, it's a funny story.
Yeah, it's phenomenal that you use that same prowess that he had, instead of using it to sell candy and cereal or whatever, use it to teach. Use it to help teachers teach so that the children learn the easiest. Why make it hard? Just you synthesize tonality down to tonal patterns. And I say take tonality and synthesize it down to harmonic functions first. Right? And root patterns and the like.
Mm-hmm.
And
and this has been my claim about how you can teach someone to identify tonality without labeling any resting tones, without doing any of that. And that is a popular
what's really cool
claim around here
about the way I've been doing this is that you've got these very familiar root patterns, and you just change the tonality, because they know this is the right way and this is the wrong way. Well, now you just say, major, minor, if they're ready for naming, but you just do the same, and then the same exact patterns, but in a different context. Same exact, pitches, if you want to say, right?
That is this is absurdly easy if you navigate this world with pitch letters, showing the difference between the two. Like it's so easy to do because it's like, hey kids, these root melodies are all C, F, G. But how do you know I'm in major or minor? Oh, because I can just tell I'm in major or minor because I can hear what the tonality is.
Yeah.
They don't actually need to know the name of any individual tone to get there. You can even just do 1, 4, 5 as verbal associates, and they still can tell you what tonality they're in with. And so that's been something interesting that I've noticed is that I'm all for labeling the resting tones, but you don't actually need to do it to give the term major.
CFG is major, CFG is minor, CFG is mixolydian.
Exactly. Yeah.
CFG.
What's interesting though, when I do the pitch letter stuff with kids and I say, okay, what's our resting tone? They can tell me the resting tone is C, but then I say, how do you know it's major or minor? And they'll just tell you. Like they'll just say, I just know. It just sounds like it.
Yeah.
Or how do you know it's minor or Dorian? I don't know. I just know. If they know enough about the functions, they'll actually start telling you, well, I could tell the 4 chord was a big 4 and not a little 4. And they'll start answering questions like that. But I'm not claiming everyone should do that. It's
those
just
same 3 notes cover 4 tonalities. It's crazy. The functions, right?
Yeah.
All you have to do is change the context. And we're always, listen, if I said anything, it's all inside of the context of the tonality and then the context of the harmonic function. And then you can get into beyond that. But that's a well steeped cup of tea for these 30 minutes that we do now.
We try for 30. I think we're at 39. So.
All right. That ain't bad. So chew on that. Let us know if you've got questions. We're still looking for people that are listening to us. We assume they're out there.
We know you're out there.
I hope your new year is going well, and please be in touch. Thanks, Bo.
Yeah, thanks, Eric.